My name is Jennifer Martinez, and I've been an intensive care unit nurse at Memorial General Hospital for 12 years. I hold a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the University of Texas and am certified in critical care nursing. In my career, I've witnessed countless miracles and tragedies, but nothing prepared me for what happened in room 314 during the winter of 2023. The patient arrived on a Tuesday evening in November. Thomas Holloway, a 42-year-old construction foreman, had suffered a massive traumatic brain injury after falling 3 stories from scaffolding. The paramedics had worked frantically to keep him alive during transport, but his Glasgow coma scale was a devastating 3 upon arrival. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, our head of neurology, performed the initial assessment. Thomas's pupils were fixed and dilated, showing no response to light. His intracranial pressure readings were critically elevated at 35 millimeters of mercury. The CT scan revealed extensive bilateral hemorrhaging and significant midline shift. Every indicator pointed toward irreversible brain damage. Within 48 hours, Thomas met all clinical criteria for brain death. We conducted the required tests. No corneal reflexes, no gag reflex, no spontaneous breathing when disconnected from the ventilator for 10 minutes. The electroencephalogram showed complete absence of electrical activity. 2 independent neurologists confirmed the diagnosis. Legally and medically, Thomas Holloway was dead. His wife Jennifer was a small woman with tired eyes who rarely left his bedside. She held his hand constantly, whispering stories about their daughter's soccer games and their weekend plans. The ethics committee had scheduled a meeting to discuss discontinuing life support, but Jennifer begged for more time. We granted her request, though protocol suggested otherwise. On his 8th day in the ICU, I was adjusting Thomas's ventilator settings when I noticed something unusual. His heart rate, which had remained consistently low, suddenly spiked to 90 beats per minute. I checked his monitors, thinking it might be equipment malfunction, but all readings appeared normal. His blood pressure also elevated slightly from its baseline. I documented the changes and continued my assessment. As I leaned over to check his endotracheal tube placement, I could have sworn I felt him squeeze my hand. It was barely perceptible, but after 12 years of nursing, you develop instincts about these things. Brain-dead patients don't squeeze hands, yet something had definitely happened. Dr. Morrison reviewed my notes with skepticism. Jennifer, you know as well as I do that spinal reflexes can persist after brain death. What you felt was likely an involuntary muscle contraction. The elevated vitals could be related to his infection. Thomas had developed pneumonia, common in ventilated patients, which explains some physiological changes. That night, I was checking on Thomas around 2 a.m. when I noticed his eyes were open. Not unusual for brain-dead patients, but something about his gaze seemed different. His pupils, previously fixed and dilated, appeared to be tracking my movement across the room. I grabbed a penlight and tested his pupillary response. Both pupils constricted normally to light. I immediately called Dr. Morrison, who arrived within 20 minutes. She repeated the neurological assessment, her brow furrowed with concentration. Thomas's eyes followed her penlight. He showed corneal reflexes when she touched his eyes with cotton. Most impossibly, he had a gag reflex when she tested his throat. These were signs of brainstem function that hadn't existed for over a week. "This is medically impossible," Dr. Morrison muttered, reviewing his previous test results. "I've never seen spontaneous recovery of brainstem function after confirmed brain death. We need to run a complete neurological workup immediately." She ordered another EEG, MRI, and comprehensive blood work. The tests would take several hours to complete and analyze. While waiting for results, I stayed with Thomas. Jennifer had gone home to shower and check on their daughter, leaving me alone with him. As I monitored his vitals, I began talking to him about the weather, hospital routines, anything to fill the silence. Suddenly, his hand moved. Not a spasm or reflex, a deliberate movement that grasped my fingers. "Thomas," I whispered, leaning closer to his face. His eyes, now clearly focused, looked directly into mine. His mouth moved slightly around the ventilator tube. I could see him trying to communicate, forming words that couldn't escape around the breathing apparatus. The look in his eyes was unmistakably conscious and aware. Dr. Morrison returned with the test results, her face pale. The EEG shows normal brainwave patterns. The MRI reveals significant improvement in the hemorrhaging and almost complete resolution of the midline shift. Jennifer, according to these results, his brain has essentially healed itself in 8 days. This violates everything we know about traumatic brain injury. We decided to attempt extubation, removing the breathing tube to see if Thomas could breathe independently. The procedure went smoothly, and within minutes, Thomas was breathing on his own. His oxygen saturation remained stable at 96%. Dr. Morrison and I exchanged glances, both understanding we were witnessing something unprecedented in medical literature. Thomas's first words were barely audible. "Where am I?" His voice was hoarse from the ventilator, but his speech was clear and coherent. Jennifer arrived just as he was asking for water. Her scream of joy echoed through the entire ICU. She threw herself over him, sobbing uncontrollably while he weakly patted her back with his left hand. Over the next few hours, Thomas demonstrated normal cognitive function. He knew his name, his wife's name, their address, and could recall events from before his accident. However, when we asked about the past week, he claimed to remember everything that had happened in the ICU. He described conversations Jennifer had with him, medical procedures we'd performed, and even mentioned my night shift routines. "The night nurse with the short black hair always checks my ventilator settings at 2 a.m., he told Dr. Morrison, looking directly at me. "She talks about her cat Whiskers when she thinks no one can hear her." I felt my blood run cold. I had indeed mentioned my cat during lonely overnight shifts, believing Thomas couldn't possibly hear or comprehend anything. Thomas described other details that seemed impossible for a brain-dead patient to perceive. He knew that Jennifer brought coffee from the cafeteria every morning at 7:30. He mentioned that Dr. Morrison wore different-coloured scrubs each day and that Tuesday was always blue. He even recalled the overhead page announcing a code blue in the emergency department 3 days earlier. Dr. Morrison consulted with colleagues across the country, sharing Thomas's case with leading neurologists and neurosurgeons. The consensus was unanimous. His recovery was medically impossible. Brain death is irreversible. Once the brain stem ceases functioning, it cannot regenerate. Yet Thomas Holloway sat up in bed, eating solid food and asking about returning to work. Hospital administration became involved, concerned about potential legal ramifications. If Thomas had been conscious during his brain death declaration, it raised serious questions about our protocols and potentially exposed the hospital to lawsuits. They ordered a complete review of all documentation and requested consultation with medical ethicists and legal experts. Jennifer was ecstatic but confused. During our private conversation, she revealed something disturbing. "Jennifer, he knows things he shouldn't know. Last night, he told me about a conversation I had with my sister in the hallway outside his room. He described exactly what we discussed, but he was supposedly brain dead at the time. How is that possible?" I had no answer for Jennifer's question. In 12 years of nursing, I'd never encountered anything remotely similar. I began researching medical literature, looking for case studies of patients recovering from confirmed brain death. I found isolated reports of misdiagnosis, but nothing like Thomas's documented and verified brain death, followed by complete recovery. Dr. Morrison scheduled Thomas for comprehensive psychological evaluation. The psychologist, Dr. James Wright, spent 3 hours assessing his cognitive function, memory, and personality. His report was remarkable. Thomas showed no signs of brain injury, dementia, or psychological impairment. His IQ tested above average, and his personality matched Jennifer's descriptions of pre-accident Thomas perfectly. On his 10th day in the hospital, Thomas began asking specific questions about his medical care. "Dr. Morrison, why did you tell the resident that my case would make an interesting case study for the New England Journal of Medicine?" She hadn't said those words in his presence, but rather during a private conversation with Dr. Anderson in the hallway outside his room. Thomas also knew about discussions between hospital administrators regarding his case. He mentioned hearing them talk about unprecedented medical anomaly and potential media attention. These conversations had occurred in the hospital boardroom, nowhere near his room. Yet he quoted them with startling accuracy, as later confirmed by meeting participants. The strangest revelation came during Thomas's interview with Dr. Wright. When asked about his experience during the coma, Thomas described floating above his body, watching medical procedures, and listening to conversations throughout the hospital. He provided specific details about other patients in the ICU, including names, diagnoses, and family situations he couldn't have learned through normal means. Thomas knew that Mrs. Patterson in room 310 had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, but hadn't told her family yet. He knew that the teenager in room 318 had attempted suicide, and that his parents were getting divorced. He even knew about the affair between Dr. Rodriguez and Nurse Kelly, information that wasn't common knowledge among hospital staff. I began documenting Thomas's impossible knowledge in detail. Every claim he made about events during his brain death period proved accurate when investigated. He described the exact time Jennifer's sister visited, what she wore, and their complete conversation. He knew about the priest who came to perform last rites and could quote the prayer word for word. Hospital security reviewed footage from cameras in the ICU hallways. The recordings confirmed Thomas's descriptions of people who visited, what they wore, and when they arrived. He had been unconscious and medically brain dead, yet somehow perceived and remembered events happening outside his room. Dr. Morrison called it impossible but undeniable. Thomas's physical recovery progressed rapidly. Physical therapy assessments showed minimal deficits despite his massive brain injury. His coordination, strength, and reflexes tested within normal ranges. The occupational therapist reported that he demonstrated no cognitive impairment and could perform complex tasks without difficulty. His recovery defied all medical predictions and expectations. On his 14th day in the hospital, Thomas passed all discharge criteria. His vital signs were stable, he was eating regularly, and he demonstrated full cognitive function. Jennifer was preparing to take him home when he made a request that chilled me. "I need to speak with the families of patients who died while I was here. I have messages for them." Thomas claimed that during his out-of-body experience, he had encountered deceased patients who wanted to communicate with their families. He provided specific names, room numbers, and detailed personal information about patients who had died during his ICU stay. The accuracy of his information was verified through medical records and family interviews. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson had died in room 308 on Thomas's 5th day. He claimed she wanted to tell her daughter about a hidden jewelry box in her bedroom closet. When contacted, the daughter confirmed finding the box exactly where Thomas described it. She had never mentioned the jewelry to anyone at the hospital, and Thomas had no way of knowing about it. Mr. Robert Kim had died in room 316 on Thomas's 9th day. Thomas said Mr. Kim wanted his son to know that he was proud of him for getting into medical school, even though he had died before hearing the acceptance news. The son confirmed that his acceptance letter arrived the day after his father's death, information not known to hospital staff. The family encounters became emotionally overwhelming. 5 different families confirmed that Thomas possessed impossible knowledge about their deceased relatives. He knew private conversations, family secrets, and personal details that only the deceased could have known. Some families found comfort in his messages, while others were deeply disturbed by the implications. Dr. Morrison scheduled a case conference with the hospital's ethics committee. "We have a patient who was medically brain dead for 8 days, then recovered completely while claiming to have been conscious throughout the experience. He possesses knowledge that defies medical explanation. We need guidance on how to proceed with his case and documentation. The ethics committee was divided. Some members argued that Thomas's recovery, while unusual, was simply a misdiagnosis of brain death. Others believed his case challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness and death. They recommended comprehensive documentation and suggested submitting the case for peer review by national medical organizations. Thomas was scheduled for discharge on Thursday morning. On Wednesday evening, as I prepared to work what I thought would be my final shift caring for him, he approached me with a disturbing prediction. "Jennifer, tomorrow when I leave, I won't be going home with my family. Something else is going to happen. I can feel myself being pulled back to where I was during those 8 days." "What do you mean?" I asked, alarmed by the certainty in his voice. Thomas looked out the window at the city lights. "The consciousness that allowed me to return. It's not meant to stay in this world permanently. I was given time to deliver those messages, to prove that death isn't what we think it is. But now I have to go back." I tried to reassure him, suggesting he speak with Dr. Wright about these concerns, but Thomas shook his head. "This isn't about psychology or mental health. This is about the nature of existence itself. I've seen what lies beyond death, Jennifer. It's not frightening, but it's not meant for the living to understand completely." Thursday morning arrived with unexpected developments. Thomas was dressed and ready for discharge when he suddenly collapsed in his room. Jennifer screamed for help as I rushed to assess him. His pulse was weak and thready, his breathing shallow. Dr. Morrison arrived within minutes, but Thomas's condition was rapidly deteriorating. "What's happening to him?" Jennifer cried as we transferred Thomas back to his bed. Dr. Morrison performed a quick neurological assessment, her face growing increasingly concerned. Thomas's pupils were becoming dilated again, his reflexes were diminishing. The impossible recovery seemed to be reversing itself just as mysteriously as it had begun. Within an hour, Thomas had returned to his previous comatose state. His Glasgow coma scale dropped back to 3, his pupils became fixed and dilated, and he lost all brainstem reflexes. The monitors showed the same patterns we had seen during his original brain death period. It was as if his 2-week recovery had been completely erased. Dr. Morrison ordered immediate testing, but the results confirmed our worst fears. Thomas's EEG showed no brain activity. His MRI revealed the return of massive hemorrhaging and midline shift. Every test indicated that he had returned to his brain-dead state. Jennifer refused to leave his bedside, holding his hand and begging him to come back to her again. This time, the medical team understood what we were witnessing. Thomas had been granted a temporary return to consciousness for a specific purpose, to demonstrate that awareness could persist beyond clinical death and to provide comfort to grieving families. His messages had been delivered, his impossible recovery documented. Now he was returning to whatever realm exists beyond our physical understanding. For 3 days, we maintained Thomas on life support while Jennifer struggled with the reality that her husband's consciousness had departed again. But this time, our approach was different. Instead of seeing it as medical failure, we recognized it as completion of something profound and purposeful that transcended our understanding of medicine. Dr. Morrison, Jennifer, and I spent hours discussing what we had witnessed: the impossible recovery, the messages from deceased patients, the detailed knowledge of events during clinical death. All of it challenged our fundamental assumptions about consciousness, death, and the nature of human existence. On Sunday morning, Jennifer made the decision to withdraw life support. "He's already gone," she said tearfully. "He came back to teach us something important about death, and now he needs to rest." The ethics committee supported her decision, understanding that Thomas's consciousness had already departed for the second and final time. Thomas Holloway died peacefully at 2:47 p.m. on Sunday, November 28th, surrounded by his family and the medical team who had cared for him during his impossible 2-week recovery. Unlike his first death, This passing felt complete and natural. His purpose had been fulfilled. The autopsy revealed massive traumatic brain injury consistent with his original accident. The pathologist found evidence of the temporary healing that had occurred during his recovery period, but the underlying damage remained extensive. Most remarkably, there were signs of cellular regeneration that had no medical explanation, tissue repair that violated everything we knew about brain injury. Jennifer, Thomas's wife, asked me to speak at his memorial service. I shared the story of his impossible recovery, the messages he delivered to grieving families, and the profound impact his case had on everyone who witnessed it. Thomas taught us that consciousness is more resilient than we believed, I told the gathered mourners. Death is not the end, but a transition to something beyond our current understanding. 3 months after Thomas's final death, I received letters from the 5 families who had received messages through him. Each described how Thomas's communications had brought them peace, closure, and comfort during their grief. Mrs. Thompson's daughter wrote, "Knowing that Mom was aware enough to tell me about the jewelry box helped me feel she was still with me somehow." Robert Kim's letter was particularly moving. Thomas told me my father was proud of my medical school acceptance before I even knew about it myself. It's given me purpose in my studies, knowing Dad somehow knew about my future and approved. I'm planning to specialize in neurology because of what your patient taught us about consciousness. Dr. Morrison took a sabbatical following Thomas's case, traveling to research consciousness studies at universities around the world. When she returned 6 months later, she had developed a new perspective on brain death protocols and the possibility of awareness persisting beyond measurable brain activity. Hospital administration commissioned a comprehensive review of Thomas's case, interviewing all medical staff involved and documenting every aspect of his impossible recovery. The report concluded that while the events were medically unexplainable, they were thoroughly documented and witnessed by multiple credible professionals. The Thomas Holloway case became a catalyst for changes in our ICU protocols. We now speak more carefully around patients who appear unconscious, assume possible awareness even in brain-dead individuals, and treat all patients with enhanced dignity based on the possibility that consciousness might persist in ways we cannot detect. I requested a transfer to a different unit 6 months after Thomas's case, not because of trauma, but because of transformation. His experience had taught me that nursing involves caring for aspects of patients that extend beyond their physical bodies. I wanted to work in hospice care, helping families navigate the mysterious transition between life and death. In my new role, I often share Thomas's story with families struggling to understand death and consciousness. While I don't claim to explain what happened, I help them understand that love and connection may persist beyond clinical death in ways that medical science is only beginning to glimpse. Jennifer, Thomas's widow, and I remained in contact. She eventually remarried a widower she met at a grief support group, someone who understood the unique nature of her loss. At her wedding 2 years later, she told me, "Thomas would approve. He taught me that love doesn't end with death, it just changes form." The families who received messages through Thomas formed an informal support group, meeting monthly to discuss their experiences and find comfort in shared understanding that consciousness persists beyond physical death. They called themselves the Messenger Families, honoring Thomas's role in bringing them peace. Dr. Wright, the psychologist who evaluated Thomas, changed his practice focus to work with individuals reporting near-death experiences and consciousness phenomena. Thomas convinced me that psychology needs to expand beyond materialist assumptions, he explained. Human awareness operates according to principles we're only beginning to understand. 5 years later, Room 314 has housed hundreds of other patients, but Thomas's case remains legendary among our staff. New nurses and residents learn about the patient who recovered from brain death to deliver messages from the deceased, then peacefully returned to whatever realm exists beyond our physical understanding. I often think about Thomas's final words to me before his consciousness departed. death isn't the ending we fear, it's a doorway to something larger. His 2-week impossible recovery proved that human awareness, love, and connection operate according to principles that transcend our current medical knowledge. The medical establishment has slowly begun acknowledging cases like Thomas's, though full scientific acceptance remains years away. Consciousness researchers study our documentation, seeking patterns that might explain how awareness persists beyond measurable brain activity. What I learned from caring for Thomas Holloway is that medicine must remain humble about the mysteries of human consciousness. We can measure brainwaves, assess reflexes, and document vital signs, but the essence of what makes us human, our awareness, our love, our connections to others, may exist in dimensions beyond our instrument's ability to detect. Thomas's case taught me that death is not a medical failure, but a natural transition that we understand poorly. His impossible recovery and peaceful final departure showed that consciousness, love, and human connection persist in ways that challenge our current scientific paradigms. I continue working in hospice care, helping families navigate the mystery of death with greater understanding and less fear. Thomas Holloway's legacy lives in every family I help understand that their loved one's consciousness, awareness, and love transcend the boundaries between life and death. The notebook, where I documented every detail of Thomas's impossible 2 weeks, remains in my desk drawer. Occasionally, I share excerpts with other healthcare workers who encounter unexplainable cases of consciousness persisting beyond clinical death. Thomas's story provides framework for understanding that we're witnessing phenomena science has yet to fully explain. 12 years of critical care nursing taught me to trust medical protocols and scientific evidence. Thomas Holloway taught me that human consciousness operates according to principles beyond our current understanding, that love transcends death, and that some patients return briefly to teach us profound truths about existence itself. His case remains the most extraordinary experience of my nursing career, proof that death is not the absolute boundary we assume, that consciousness can persist in ways we cannot measure, and that love creates connections strong enough to bridge the gap between life and whatever lies beyond our physical understanding.